Good afternoon. I'm so glad y'all could join us this afternoon for the celebration of Frank Howell's life. Most of us only knew Frank in the third age of his life, as they say here in Mexico. You know, they don't call us old people. We're just people who have reached the third age. And I think we can all agree that he was quite a character. When Kate asked me to be the facilitator for his celebration, I immediately started thinking about which stories to tell. Before we ever met or arrived back here in 2013, Trudy told me she thought we would really like Frank and Kate. And of course, she was right. I have a tendency to flip people off whom I know and love if they say or do something I think is stupid or ridiculous. Yes, I know it's childish. Still, Frank was my favorite target. He was always good-natured and usually returned the favor, as we both laughed. Frank was also a sartorial snob. He would only wear shirts that had been ironed at the cleaners with their little pleats. He favored silk shirts or any other fabric of high, soft quality. When we met up, I always had to sneak a feel of his shirt sleeve or shoulder, maybe pat him on the shoulder, because it was so darn touchable. You have great Frank stories, which we invite you to share via Zoom or in person after Kate's presentation. At their wedding, Frank and Kate shared several readings important to both of them. They loved Khalil Gibran's book, The Prophet, and this excerpt on marriage was one of them. Then Almitra spoke again and said, "But what of marriage, master?" And he answered, saying, "You were born together, and together you shall be forevermore. You shall be together when the white wings of death scatter your days. Aye, you shall be together even in the silent memory of God. But let there be spaces in your togetherness, and let the winds of the heavens dance between you. Love one another, but make not a bond of love. Let it rather be a sea between the shore, moving sea between the shores of your souls. Fill each other's cup, but drink not from one cup. Give one another of your bread, but eat not from the same loaf. Sing and dance together and be joyous, but let each one of you be alone, even as the strings of a lute are alone, although they quiver with the same music. Give your hearts, but not into each other's keeping, for only the hand of life can contain your hearts. And stand together, yet not too near together. For the pillars of the temple stand apart, and the oak tree and cypress grow not in each other's shadows. Kate is now going to share her memories. Some of them will be about the Frank we knew and loved, and some about the young Studley Frank. I don't know if y'all checked out some of his pictures, but he was quite good looking. Here's Kate.
Welcome, everybody. I want to thank you all here today and all of you watching on Zoom. Some of you didn't know Frank well, but I hope you will get a sense of the man from what you see and hear today. I want today to be a celebration of Frank's life. It was a good life. He enjoyed it to the max, and he left when he wanted to. There were many good memories, some stories you probably haven't heard before that you'll hear today. Besides his creative work as a sculptor and potter, he also enjoyed cooking and eating. He really enjoyed having friends over for dinner and preparing one of his signature dinners. As many of you know, Frank didn't do computers. Unlike many of us who basically think in 2 dimensions, he thought in 3 dimensions, which is one of the reasons he became a sculptor. Most of you knew him as a potter, but his undergraduate work was in sculpture, and both his BFA and MFA were in sculpture. He became a potter after he married for the first time and needed to support a family. He knew he couldn't do that if he continued as a sculptor. One of the things that I most admired about him was the fact that regardless of where he lived, he was always involved in the community. When Frank and I moved to Bellingham, Washington, a few years after we married and opened the 5th incarnation of Mud in Your Eye in Fairhaven, which was a real, not a manufactured, historical district on the south end of town, he immediately offered to serve on the board of the Old Fairhaven Association. This was a group of local business people who were working to attract more customers to a somewhat out-of-the-way shopping district that had a long history, but no current claim to fame. The Alaska Ferry Terminal at the foot of the street was the departure point for travelers taking cars, campers, and trailers to Alaska, and we knew we had to capitalize on their presence. The only other way to get your car to Alaska for tourist or business purposes at that time was to drive the old Alcan Highway, which started in Montana, went up through Alberta and British Columbia, and finally into Alaska. It was a very long drive. My mom had stories about driving the Alcan Highway in the 1920s. So that's where some of my wanderlust comes from. We promoted both Fairhaven and our shop and had customers from all over the USA, as well as the Pacific Rim, Canada, and Europe shopping with us. I'll come back to Mud in Your Eye a little later, since this business was his life. He lived and breathed Mud in Your Eye. I may occasionally refer to it as Mud, as that was our shorthand name for it. I'm going to recap briefly the chronology of Frank's life, just to put a few things into perspective. Frank was born in 1940 and grew up in Fargo, North Dakota. His younger brother, Scott, was born in Fargo also, almost 10 years after Frank. When Frank was 13, his family moved to Fort Worth, where his dad was manager of an upscale Ivy League menswear store. After high school, Frank attended TCU for a year until the family moved out to Tucson, where he attended the University of Arizona and graduated in 1963. He married, and he and his wife moved to Eugene, Oregon, where he continued at the University of Oregon for his graduate studies. After receiving his MFA in 1965, he accepted a position at Washington High School in Los Angeles, which at that time was about 90% Black, teaching pottery, and continued there for 5 years, ending his time there as head of the art department, overseeing 4 other art instructors, as well as continuing his own teaching. His 2 children, Dan and Amanda, were born during this period. In 1971, he began looking for a place he and his wife could put down roots and open an arts and crafts shop, selling fine, high-fired, functional stoneware pottery, as well as other handcrafted items, such as blown glass, leather, wood, macrame, fabric, and other stuff. It was the early 70s, a perfect time for such a venture. They ended up in Los Gatos, California, a small town at the base of the San Francisco Peninsula. And just a note here, as with many town names in the US that derive from other languages and consequently are mispronounced, I'm saying the town's name the way it was pronounced there, not the way that correct Spanish would say it. The business, Mud in Your Eye Pottery, was an immediate success, carrying only high-fired stoneware from only American artists The store had every conceivable product you can imagine made out of clay. Over the next few years, he wrote a book, The Craft of Pottery, on beginning pottery techniques. We have a copy of it out here, which was published in 1975 by Harper and Row in both English and Spanish. He took up soccer and coached an American youth soccer organization team for 10 years, from 1972 to 1982. He joined and became active in the Los Gatos Chamber of Commerce. In 1982, he founded and became a director of the Los Gatos Parking Commission, working to build an underground parking garage in the heart of Old Town, the commercial district of Los Gatos. This was eventually built a few years later, but only after local elections brought on 3 new members to the town council who were supportive of the project. He was honored to be the official opener, and that's him climbing a ladder to take the fabric off the sign for the new garage. It was a huge improvement in the shopping district, and Old Town boomed. In 1994, the town honored him for all the time and effort he had put into making it happen. By the mid-'80s, he had opened 2 additional locations of Mud, one at Pier 39 in San Francisco and one in Mountain View, a neighboring town in the South Bay. Not surprisingly, he got burned out and left the pottery business for about 10 years, becoming a manufacturer's rep, selling embroidered and imprinted t-shirts and leisure wear at resort and tourist destinations and at manufacturers' trade shows. He was working all of Northern California, Northern Nevada, and up into Oregon, which is a very large territory. Frank and I met during this time and were married in 1990. We moved in 1996 to Bellingham, Washington, both quite happy to be getting out of California, which was becoming a very expensive and stressful place to live. We reopened Mud in Your Eye Pottery in 1996 and always had at least one in-house house potter in addition to Frank. Working in the in-store studio, producing pottery for sale. At our peak, we carried work from about 90 artists from all over the US and Western Canada. Our in-house production comprised about a quarter of our total inventory, and our kiln was loaded and fired about once a week. We retired in 2008 and moved here to Lakeside, bringing with us all of the equipment and supplies necessary to set up yet another studio. Once here, Frank set up a studio and began giving pottery classes. He scheduled regular sales events where his students could have the satisfaction of being able to sell something they had made. And excuse me, I just need a drink of water. I want to give you a little more information here about Mud in Your Eye. Frank designed the shops, the fixtures, the shelving where the pottery was displayed, the whole thing. He could visualize where the various products would be displayed. He understood the psychology of people uncomfortable with the idea of entering an artsy store. And so he designed the way customer traffic would flow through the store, taking people around past the fun or silly products first, so they would lose their fear of being in an art store. And we did have some fun and silly products. Several different styles of piggy banks, cat and dog food bowls with whimsical names on them like Spoiled Rotten, Fuzz Butt, and Mr. Attitude. And face mugs with a caricature of a celebrity such as Elvis or Marilyn or Jerry Garcia or Einstein, or an occupation or a hobby that applied to the person that somebody was buying a gift for. We have a string of photos coming up. As you proceeded around the room, you would discover teapots, dinnerware, serving bowls, baking dishes and casseroles, chip and dip platters, sushi trays, vases, wine goblets, coffee mugs, beer steins, and bathroom items such as toothbrush and toothpaste holders, makeup trays, soap dishes, lotion dispensers, and shaving mugs. The jewelry display was beside the sales desk with a wide selection of jewelry lines unavailable anywhere else in Western Washington. I'm wearing some of those today. Frank knew that most pottery shops were either the work of a single individual with a single look or style, or a cooperative with different potter's work displayed with all the pieces of one potter grouped together, all the pieces sharing the same overall look. Frank turned this conventional wisdom on its head and organized the store the same way a clothing store would be arranged, with pants in one area, shirts in another, t-shirts apart, dress clothes somewhere over there. So we had a mug wall and mug racks that held over 100 mugs all in one location. Wine goblets in an adjacent area, dinnerware in a separate display, serving bowls of all sizes, shapes, and colors in yet another area. If a customer identified a particular color combination that they liked, our staff were trained to walk them around the store, pointing out all of the other products that that particular potter produced, so they could begin to see the possibilities of creating a complete kitchen or dining service in that one combination. After we had been open a few years, Frank was able to locate someone casting porcelain bathroom sinks. And we were able to display sinks glazed with other bathroom accoutrements that matched side by side. This is a photograph of a sink that we had in our master bath at our home in Bellingham with our 2 cats. And to top everything off, our studio was inside the store itself with a large window and a Dutch door leading into it, where customers could watch potters producing products which would eventually be for sale. In the store, we had beautiful hand-dripped candles, scented candles, incense burners, remember this is the 70s, bubbling tabletop water fountains, and both metal and porcelain wind chimes. A sound system tuned to classic easy rock, the result being that the shop was a feast for the senses, relaxing and beautiful just to come into and spend time walking around. We had employees from other local shops come into our store to pass the time on their lunch break, just because it was so lovely and relaxing. For those of you here in person, you will see in some of the newspaper and magazine articles on display here that mud became one of the major retail anchors of the Fairhaven district. As far as we know, we were also the largest retailer of handcrafted stoneware pottery, American made, on the entire West Coast. I had a customer come into the store at one point who said she loved to travel. Everywhere she traveled, she wanted to find pottery shops. She went looking for them. She said the only other pottery shop she had ever come across that matched ours was in downtown Prague. And I thought that was high praise. Around 1998, I created an e-commerce site for the store, and we began shipping pottery all over the US, eventually to Europe, Japan, Australia, and New Zealand, because so many of our customers were travelers from all over the US and other countries. Many of them took notes while they were in the store, and then when they got back home, contacted us and ordered either on our website or by email. We literally shipped pottery all over the world. We started thinking and talking about retirement in 2003 when we took a vacation to Guadalajara and Lake Chapala to check it out. Both of us looked around, said we could do this, and started to plan what we needed to do to make it happen. We decided to try to sell the store, but it was too much Frank and me. Frank ran the studio, designing products, scheduling production. I ran the store, hiring and training employees and overseeing that our customers got what they wanted. Frank and I both spent most of our days there, talking and sometimes sharing and playing in the store with our customers all ears. I do remember one employee who, when Frank and I had a difference opinion in the store, cowered, terrified that this was going to be a family fight. The fight never materialized, and he slowly figured out that this was how it worked. And he began to enjoy the differences of opinion and saw how we handled difficult situations. Our customers enjoyed this as well, frequently walking around with a smirk on their faces as they tried to anticipate who was going to come out ahead. We tried for 5 years to sell the business, even signing on with an international broker who assured us he could sell anything. So finally, in the spring of 2008, we decided we didn't want to die on the floor of our store and we would have to close. Frank did not want to do a standard going out of business sale, as that implied we just couldn't make it. So Frank insisted that we hold a huge retirement closing sale in the summer of 2008. We had a mailing list of over 1,000 people. We sent out a postcard notice about the upcoming sale. The sale lasted for 6 weeks during June and July. And by the end of July, we had literally sold everything in the store, including the custom pine shelving and display units. By September, when everything went to hell up north on Wall Street, we were in Ajijic signing a lease on a rental home, and we moved here in November. Now I want to highlight some of the mostly or more unknown aspects of Frank's life, and I will start with our wedding. There's some pictures out there if you want to take a look later. When Frank and I started planning our wedding, we didn't want a church wedding, nor did we want just to go to a justice of the peace. We were living just outside Santa Cruz and had several state parks nearby with old growth redwoods. After visiting a couple state parks, we knew we wanted to be married in a gorgeous old growth redwood grove in Henry Cowell State Park. We had a small wedding and reception with just immediate family and a few very close friends. We both loved watching their faces as we all walked into this park, their heads tilted up and their mouths open as they gazed at these beautiful tall trees, some hundreds of years old and hundreds of feet tall. We both considered this place a sacred space, nature's own cathedral, and we have both photographs and a video that we could go back to and watch on occasion. During his high school years, Frank worked summers at the menswear store his dad managed in Fort Worth. Shortly after starting there, he was assigned the task of finding the best accessories, shirts, ties, and belts for the men who were shopping there. He said most men don't have a clue how to buy clothes. His artistic eye helped to double the sales volume. He had always been a very skinny kid. That's him on the left. I had mentioned earlier to someone, his size of his arms are about the size of my ankles. So he wore clothes well. He had a fully enhanced wardrobe, including tuxedos by the time he was in high school. When he attended the University of Arizona, his fraternity brothers dubbed him Swizz. And this is also out there, short for swizzle stick, because he was so skinny, they said you couldn't see him if he turned sideways. His physical stature, 6'1" and 125 pounds, stopped bothering him after it kept him out of the Army and Vietnam in the mid-60s. By the mid-60s, Frank had graduated from the U of A. He headed up to Eugene, Oregon for his graduate work. The students obtaining a graduate degree were expected to participate in a show of student work and hopefully sell some of it. He was thrilled when representatives from the city of South Pasadena attended And besides buying all of his sculptures, commissioned several more playground sculptures for public parks in that fair city. He was the only participant in the show who did not need to pack up and take his work home with him. The buyers from Pasadena arranged to have everything packed up and shipped south. Frank was fastidious about his grooming. He grew his first Van Dyke beard and mustache as a graduate student in Oregon, long before the later hirsute years when young men everywhere began growing longer hair and beards. His two children were born in the late 60s and never saw their dad clean shaven in his entire life. In 2000, Frank was notified that he had been chosen to be included in the 18th edition of Who's Who in the World, 2001. That's the big book that's right out there. This is not something you can apply for. You have to be nominated to be included, and the editors screen nominations carefully to avoid a situation of someone quietly nominating himself for career or ego enhancement. They researched his background, everything from the sale of his graduate work to the city of South Pasadena, to the establishment of 4 different locations of Bud Your Eye over the years, to his work and recognition by the Los Gatos Chamber of Commerce and later the Los Gatos Parking Commission, to his coaching of the AYSO American Youth Soccer Organization team for 10 years. As an aside, he later said he was never in better physical condition than he was during those years of both playing soccer himself and coaching the boys' team. He was always very proud of the work he did then and the conditioning he acquired. Oh, and by the way, I did not nominate him for Who's Who in the World. We never did discover who had submitted his name for inclusion, and to this day, I still have no idea who it was. Lest you think he got a swelled head from this attention, let me assure you that he had good friends who helped him keep a level head. Several good friends had an honorary flipping off relationship with him. He was never allowed to lord it over lesser beings. One of Frank's favorite sleep shirts was a long-sleeved "Shut Up, Frank" shirt from a sports bar and grill that we discovered on a vacation with another couple on the Baja Peninsula in 2000. Driving into Todos Santos, we passed an older building with a huge sign painted on the outside wall. All of us in the car yelled, "Stop!" immediately, and we all piled in to see what we had discovered. It was a small bar and souvenir shop selling short and long sleeve t-shirts, baseball caps, coffee mugs, bumper stickers, and assorted other souvenir items, all with the "Shut Up, Frank" logo. Frank bought 2 or 3 items, and from that day on, he got used to hearing "Shut up, Frank" anytime he got particularly long-winded or too full of himself. What really broke us all up was another customer already in the shop, also named Frank, who told us he also had to deal with friends and family telling him when to be quiet. Frank loved those shirts and hats for the rest of his life. I want to shift gears a bit here and talk about the end of Frank's life. When Frank was beginning to feel there was something seriously wrong in the summer of 2021, we set up doctor's appointments with a variety of specialists here to see if we could determine what was wrong. He was having a variety of symptoms, and there didn't seem to be one answer. Finally, following x-rays and a PET scan, we were sent in to see an oncologist. He showed us the test results and told us it was stage 4 cancer, and it had spread to several locations. He prescribed pain meds, said he could give Frank stronger ones as he needed them. Frank had gone on oxygen as he was having trouble breathing, and the doc said to come back in to see him if anything changed. In October, Frank told me he wanted to see his longtime friends once more before he became too sick to do it. So we planned what I began to call a living wake, for friends to come in for a couple of hours and goodbyes could be said all around. We had over 40 longtime friends come by over a 4-hour afternoon visiting time, and all expressed gratitude at being able to see Frank while he was still strong enough and coherent. Sometime in September, a friend had mentioned to me that Mexico has a death with dignity provision written into its constitution. She had been present when a good friend had had the IV attached, and she and others were able to say their farewells before the patient lost consciousness. So during one of our visits to the oncologist, we asked about this. We were told that yes, he could help with this. He would need to have a second doctor come see Frank for an assessment of his condition, and then both physicians would sign off on it. It was limited to a time frame of within 2 months before his projected date of death. He advised us that as Mexico is predominantly Roman Catholic, that not all physicians are willing to do this, but he would when Frank got further along and his condition worsened. Frank had already lost quite a bit of weight. He was on oxygen 24/7. He needed a walker around the house, sometimes a wheelchair when he felt particularly weak, and no longer left the house except for doctor visits. We had both had living wills prepared, and I was very conscious that if he fell around the house and seriously hurt himself, broke a hip or a bone, he would likely wind up in the hospital, and then the issue of scheduling his own deaths would be greatly complicated. So as his caregiver, I was always aware of where he was and what he was doing. He continued to decline during October and November, losing his appetite, losing more weight, and getting much weaker. In early December, we discussed timing for his procedure, as it was obvious he wasn't going to last more than a month or 2 at the most. So we made one final visit to the oncologist, asking him to have the palliative care specialist who would conduct the procedure contact us to set up an initial interview. The week before Christmas, a very nice doctor came down from Guadalajara to meet and interview Frank, and we scheduled the procedure for the Monday after Christmas, which happened to be Frank's birthday. We had discussed timing, and both of us thought it would serve a kind of cosmic poetry for Frank to exit this life on the same date he had come in on. Unfortunately, the whole procedure, as it is done in Mexico, takes 30 to 40 hours, so it wouldn't happen on that date, but a day or 2 later. We were both okay with that. Once Frank was settled comfortably on a bed and the IV attached, it took about 2 hours for him to lose consciousness. From then on, it was a slow process with an IV containing strong pain meds and muscle relaxants to slow and eventually stop the heart. The doc said she would return the following morning and would bring an additional IV pump, as these little pumps lasted about 30 hours. The second pump would likely finish the procedure, which it did, as Frank passed in the small hours of Wednesday, the 29th. When I woke up early that morning, the house was still. No breathing, no rasping, no sounds at all. I went into the guest room where Frank was lying, put my hand on his face. His head and torso were still just a bit warm, but his extremities were cold. When the doctor arrived that morning about 8:30, she said he had probably passed 4 or 5 hours before. It was very reassuring having her there, as she was able to confirm death and to complete the paperwork necessary before the funeral home came to retrieve his body. So many people who knew Frank have expressed sorrow at his passing. During the months of his decline, Frank and I had discussed everything. Our lives together, our marriage, his illness, what my life would be after he was gone. He had made the decision not to seek treatment, and I respected that. He was ready to die. He did not want to live a circumscribed life in pain and poor health, watching his own decline in the mirror every day and seeing friends around him decline and die. He was my partner, my best friend, my lover, my husband, and my cheerleading squad for over 30 years. We were both able to say goodbye until next time. I miss him greatly, expect to see him coming around the corner into the living room when I hear some noise in the house, and then instantly remember that he's gone, not coming back. I feel blessed to have a community of friends here who have helped me in numerous ways, and I say a very heartfelt thank you to all of you. I have been sorting through 30 years of accumulated stuff, which we both collected, putting photos into photo albums, remembering trips we took, places we visited, and the accolades and accomplishments of a good life lived together and the laughter shared. I now am trying to figure out what the next chapter in my life will look like. And all I know for certain is that it will be very different. I won't have a man I loved more than any other around anymore. And that is truly a huge loss. But I do know that he was completely satisfied with his life and all he was able to accomplish. And that when the time came, he was able to choose the manner and the time and place of his own death. I still talk to him every day. As on the occasion when we first encountered each other in this life and we recognized each other, I believe that we will be together again in future lives. That gives me peace and patience. I hope there are some among you who will share thoughts or memories of your interactions with Frank. I know that he had many friends, many who loved him, and I ask you to share those memories with us now. Lynn will take over as our Mistress of Ceremonies, and we will call on people present first and then on Zoom.
All righty. At this time, if anyone in the audience has a story to share, I will bring you the mic. Please state your name and where you met Frank, and then your memory.
I remember just like it was yesterday, but it must have been 12 years ago. I'm Janice Kimball, and I was an original member of this group. And I remember Frank and Kate when we had lunch after the first time they came to a meeting at UU, and Kate sat in front of me and Frank sat behind me. And Frank had an outrageous sense of humor. And I was the perfect foil. Anyway, he was very mischievous, and Kate sat in front of me and she said, "Don't pay any attention." And Kate and Frank kind of teased me. And it's funny because I was a perfect foil because I never get a joke. I never get what's really going on. And but he was just a person with a really good heart. And I think I was just very impressed when he wanted to lead a soccer team to help the young men in Mescala. And he He just gave it his finest effort, even though that he wasn't in bad health. And it was very impressive that he didn't give up until the last straw. And I just we'll miss him here. And he also went out of his way to make friends with Francisco, and he was just a very sincere and very good man.
Hello, good afternoon. I am Francisco Ursua. I remember when my good friend, Howell, practiced yoga in LCS and Ajijic. And he said to me, come on, let's go to do yoga. And I started practice yoga. And he put all power for do yoga. And he was a good friend for me. And I miss him. Rest in peace.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I'm Jeannie Green, and I met Frank. I made it. I'm sorry, Kate. I got lost. I met Frank at a meeting of ASA, I think when he first came to town. And he said, I'm offering pottery classes. And I went, I want to do that. And he said, sure, come on. And so I did. And about a year later, he asked me to be his studio assistant because he was really desperate. And I said, I don't know what I'm doing. It doesn't matter, just show up. And we had about a 5-year relationship as master and assistant, and we got along really well. And when Kate was planning Frank's obituary, I said, well, the one thing I would suggest is that you have to include the word curmudgeon. And she did. But we got along really well. We understood each other's humor, and I was not afraid to tell Frank to shut up. So I miss Frank, but Kate, I'm so glad to have your friendship. Appreciate you being here. Donna? Anybody? Donna? Thank you.
Well, I'm Donna Burrows, and I met Frank and Kate here at the Unitarian, well, not here, at the Unitarian Fellowship. And Frank and I would always joke around. And, but Frank, as you know, was very opinionated. I know, no. Well, I can also be quite opinionated on occasion. And we ended up at a circle supper together at Fred and Mardell's. And I felt bad about you guys because we started on something. I don't even remember what it was, but Frank was, and I got all worked up and I went, and then he started to say something and I went, wait a minute, furthermore, blah, 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 blah. And he said, don't interrupt me. And I said, oh, you don't like it, do you? And then we all just laughed because we were both doing the same thing. And that's what I liked about him, because you could just push back and he'd think it was funny. But I also just have to say, I am very happy that I have what I think is one of the most brilliant candelabras for a dining room table made by Frank, because it is at a level that people can still see each other while you have candlelight. And I went, oh my God, that's genius. So every time I use it, which isn't often because I don't have a lot of company, but anyway, every time I use it or see it, which is every day, I think of Frank and his brilliance. So Kate, I know you must feel a horrible loss. I'm here to tell you life does go on in a different way. And I know you've got a lot of friends here for you, me included.
Else, Fred?
Fred Harland. I knew Frank through the Unitarian Fellowship, but only in his and my third age. And I didn't know so much about him. And I would just say, wow. Wow to what Kate said about all this stuff. Wow about his creativity. And even about his curmudgeonness that other people are talking about. But I don't want to talk about his creativity or his curmudgeonness. I'd like to talk about Frank and his reliability. We knew from the fellowship when we were over in Bravo that every day there would be flowers for the fellowship that we could all enjoy, that he had bought, and then afterwards he would take them home and give them to Kate. And that was important to us, I assume to Kate. We could always count on Frank to disagree when anybody used God language or church language or things like that. He was reliable on that particular score. He was always there to collect the offering that other people put in, to attend every function, and to participate in all our new ventures, including those related to soccer, that he was the one who established. And of course, he's reliable every week when we on Zoom attend this service and light our chalice that reminds us of things you and of Frank who made it. So he was not only creative and a curmudgeon, but very reliable. And you know, we all rely on reliable people who are always there, who you could always depend on. We could depend on Frank, and we'll miss him very much.
Anyone from that side of the room?
And I've written a few things, so I need to.
Do you want to come up front?
Yeah,
to
I
the-
need to come up front, yeah. My name is Paul Bennett. I'm going to repeat a couple of things that Kate said in her story of Frank's life. I'm going to start off with a project that Frank and I did together. It was Frank's idea, soccer therapy for Mexicans who loved the game. Most people knew Frank was a master ceramist, clay transformed into art, but few knew he taught art in California at a high school and was also the soccer coach. Kate's already mentioned this, but anyway, he was an aficionado of the game, watched World Cup soccer, could even explain the offside rule. Why were we traveling in a vehicle loaded with soccer balls and fruit juices and cookies, destination Mescala, a weekly 40-minute drive? Our plan evolved from one of our first outreach programs. A small room at the Mescala High School was used as a kitchen dining room for about 20 or so very needy kids. Our help and funding provided a nutritious meal, the only meal these kids probably got on that day. Our liaison was the school's English teacher. She told us what a troubled pueblo Mescala was, full of despair and hopelessness, broken families, kids on drugs, and pregnant unmarried teenagers. The soccer field was adjacent to the school where a crowd of kids awaited us. Chevy, Bob Coach's driver, was our actual runaround coach. Training involved learning to pass accurately, dribbling around plastic pyramids, and taking shots at the goal. Chevy kept the kids moving. After their treats were juice and cookies in the shade. The program lasted several months, but eventually attendance dropped. Did they expect more rich gringos? Did they expect more from rich gringos? Was the practice too strenuous? Finally, we couldn't justify the time and funding for so few participants. The experiment ended. On those trips to Mescala, Frank and I talked nonstop. American politics, history, UU News, and especially Rachel Madhow, who I know Kate and Frank loved her show. I got to know and enjoy his opinions. And you know what I mean when I say he was unapologetically forthright and unambiguous. That was Frank. Frank was a truly frank person.
Thank you, Paul. Anyone else like to share a memory? No? Trudy?
Thank you, Lynn. My name is Trudy Crippen, and I have two very brief memories. One, Fred alluded to the fact that every week Frank took up the collection, and Matt, in his innocence at that time, asked during a service what we called the person who took up the collection. And we could have rehearsed it. We could never have done it better. Everyone simply and clearly said, Frank, that's what we call him. And then a very personal memory, the next to the last time I was with Frank, and this was after the living wake, I was giving Frank a hug goodbye after he and I had, done our gradual flight, finger sharing. And he said to me, "You're going to miss me when I'm gone." And I said, "I know." And we both had tears in our eyes.
Anyone else here? What? Oh, one more.
Because, oh, okay. It's just a word of gratitude, actually, because I'm one of Frank's students, and I moved down here in 2011 to take care of my mom. And for 20 years prior, I said when I retired, I was going to make pottery. Through LCS, they said, Kate works in the library. Her husband teaches pottery, and I hooked up with Frank. Met with Frank. He could not have been more of a curmudgeon with me and my mom. And I don't think he really liked teaching, actually. I don't know. Is that true? Did he like teaching? Anyway, he said, I've already started this semester's class. You can't be in it. You'll have to wait. But for me, it was like waiting for Christmas. And eventually I got into the class, and I have my own pottery studio now and almost my own kiln. And it has been, a wonderful, wonderful third phase of my life. And it will continue to be. And Frank gave me that gift. He is the one who showed me the way. And I'm forever grateful. So Frank, if you're here and you're listening, thank you so much. I love you.
Anyone else? It looks to be like that's all of the comments from those present. And before turning the program over to Bob Coaches, who will facilitate comments about Frank from the Zoom people, Kate's asked me to read an email from one of our older members or ex-members, or maybe she's still a member, I don't know, but she doesn't live here anymore. Donna Jaramillo. I'm sure many of you remember Donna. And she writes, I planned to be on Zoom for Frank's service, but did not plan accordingly for the 2-hour time difference. Sigh. I just wanted to share that yesterday evening, I was doing some hand building in the ceramic studio where I go once a week. I started getting flashes of memories of the time that I was in Frank's studio. I think his greatest challenge in working with me was my accepting that a piece did not need to be perfect. 10 years have passed since the short time Frank mentored me, and a few months ago, I found myself once again working in the pottery medium. I think his value of a piece of ceramics being beautiful as well as functional really resonated with me. I'm so sorry we lost him. And now Kate has a couple of emails that she wants to share, and then Bob will take over.
Over here. Okay, the reason I'm reading these instead of Lynn is because they came in via email without any background explanation of who these people are. So I thought there was a little backstory that needed to be told. The first one is from a guy named Biff Dickerson, who was Frank's best friend when we were living in Bellingham. My friend Frank, we met at a Bellingham Central Lions Club general meeting, a worldwide service organization devoted originally with helping the blind and sight impaired. After sitting together a few times at our lunch meetings, we decided to meet socially as we enjoyed the same level of irreverence, wine, and food. Soon we met in Old Fairhaven for a drink and a first meetup with the love of his life, Kate. We three loved cooking and entertaining, so over the years we gathered frequently. I visited them several times after they moved to Lake Chapala. We often sat before dinner and drank tequila and relived our time together. He did so love to remind me of the time I was standing in front of the Lions Club giving a report when he thought it would be funny if he dropped my shorts to my ankles, which he did successfully. God love him. Frank and Kate had a wonderful one-of-a-kind pottery retail store as well as his studio, where I ended up purchasing all of my presents. I enjoyed his ability and his glazes so much that once he started making dinnerware, I asked him to make a set for me. I enjoy them daily, which always brings a smile to my face. In loving memory, Frank's friend, Biff. The other is from Norm Pfeiffer. I think some of you probably know him down here. For years, he volunteered in the LCS office on Saturdays. And especially when I was on the board, I always tried to work Saturday because there was no other person around that was in any capacity of knowing what to do or how to solve a problem. So I was always there on Saturdays. Norm writes, for a time, a very short time, we each thought we didn't get off on the right footing. Then after a couple of times, he called Kate at LCS on Saturdays. We suddenly both knew we had the exact same weird sense of humor. He would call and I'd recognize his voice and tell him he had the wrong number. He would address me with a first name starting with an A. I'd ask him if he was playing in the mud that day, and on we went. Eventually, I'd tell Kate that there was a heavy breather pretending to be Frank on the phone. When his cancers appeared, we continued to kibutz, but never about the illness. We all know everything is in God's hands. So as you celebrate Frank's life today, remember he's suffering no more pain.
Okay, and now I'm turning the camera over to Bob and any comments anyone from Zoom would like to make.
Amanda Howell would like to make comments. Can you please spotlight her?
Amanda, somebody would like to
Howell.
make Howell.
Howell is his daughter.
Oh, Amanda Howell.
Hi, I'm Amanda. I knew Frank before any of you. I have the best stories probably, and I'm sure he flipped me off before he flipped any of you off too. Because that was my dad. You know, he was sarcastic, completely inappropriate, especially with a girl. I worked for him at one of his stores when he was starting into the t-shirt business. And his favorite shirt was Mustache Rides, 5 cents. So he, just one of those people who was always crazy and living life, to the fullest. Definitely had a passion, for getting to know people and being in the thick of things. His move to Mexico was tough because, it meant that we just didn't see him very much anymore. But from what I gather, you all gave him welcome and open arms, and he and Kate were able to just have a fabulous life down there with you all. I definitely miss him, and I think that it's lucky that I have, so many years of good memories to fall back on. He the soccer was my brother's sport, but I remember my dad being involved in a lot of my activities and being somebody that I could count on. And I considered him my best friend for a while. I worked with him when he became a sales rep, and we spent many hours in the car talking, and often getting to a point where I'd be like, yeah, Dad, you told me that story already. Because you can only spend so many hours in a car with somebody before the repetitions start happening. But he was fun, he was great to be with, and definitely just as much of a member of the community and a strong participant in everything around him, in Los Gatos, as he was in the places he lived later in life. So thank you all for showing your love for my dad. I appreciate your time today.
Is there anybody else on Zoom that would like to make a comment? Ron and Ann Gilbert, please unmute.
Well, I got to know Frank a little bit because he and I were in the same yoga class. Years ago, every time I would come to Ahik, I would take this yoga class at LCS, and he was there. And he always amazed me because he was a big man and he was really good at yoga. And I enjoyed meeting him then.
Anyone else? I don't see anyone else. Lynn.
Okay, well, thank you all who contributed your memories. We really appreciate it. This concludes our celebration of Frank's life, except for the bubbly and the cheese and the crackers in the foyer. We have some newspaper articles and photos on the table if anyone present would like to check them out if you didn't do so beforehand. And now please meet us outside for a toast to Frank, which I'm sure he would have loved. Probably would have been his best part of this whole meeting. Thank you all for coming today.
Yeah. Thank you all for joining. I'm going to close the meeting now.